and jerk off.
And
Way
my
healthier than
preferably-
over.
Actually, much healthier than fucking sharing discords.
I'll never understand that type of internet community where you sit around on your Discord or whatever else your electronic.
Bro, now you're just like
I'm just-
prejudiced against
Oh,
this
Mr. Holier
far,
than thou.
yeah,
I'll
far end of the
never get it.
autism spectrum.
Oh, dude,
I
I
can-
wish I didn't get it. I'll put it that way.
I can see it for like particular small communities and stuff like that for certain things, but just generally jumping into a random internet group and that's where all your friends come from and that's where all your socialization happens. I just don't feel like that's a good way to go.
That's like the classic
I guarantee you it's not good though. If that's
introvert like thing that happened.
What's that?
Yeah.
This is like the classic introvert thing that happened.
I would say that that's actually quite unhealthy for people if you're not getting in-person socialization. There's just so much you're missing there, and if you're missing it, it's I would say pretty harmful for your
Dude,
development.
just do a Zoom call. Fucking easy.
Just
Well,
actually shoot myself. So sick of Teams and Zoom.
Stuff as simple as like hormones and pheromones and bacterial exchange between the like physical presence of another human being in your vicinity are pretty important for human well-being, I would say.
Exactly, and I feel like if you have that missing from your life, it's going to be very difficult to just say stay stable. I know a couple of people like they retreated into their online worlds from the pandemic and they didn't really seek too hard to maintain their social friend group. They're a couple of friends of mine and they've just gone off the fucking deep end. Like just straight up off the deep end.
Well, I think a lot of people have in the pandemic though. That's just like
Yeah. It's a combo because you're dysregulated because of your lack of social contact, and then you have the stressor of the pandemic.
Yeah,
Well, and-
yeah, but like I can see, but like the friends that I know who have been able to stay much more healthily regulated are ones who do have a small social circle that they keep up with, right? Yeah, they're not hanging out drinking with them at the clubs and bars all the time, obviously not, but the more that they are able to spend some time with them outdoors or whatever it is, the better situated they are. The people that I know that have done the worst in the pandemic for sure are the ones who have just decided to turn it all into online connection. Like they're the ones who have suffered by far the worst outcomes so far.
well, there's also
Other than
just
the
a
ones
group
who
of
caught
people
COVID.
who aren't willing to like do any sort of socialization out of fear. Like they literally won't hang outside because they're just like that's too risky.
Yeah,
that.
it's super weird. I actually know a couple people like that, and they're pretty smart. And
Put the mask on in your own car, driving by yourself.
I know I see that. A lot
Whoa,
in the
driving
city.
outside, I mean, pretty risky.
Better get those cabin air filters switched to MERV 13 at least.
Exactly.
Well, there was that study that you posted that 50. That was from the Bill Maher show. 50% of Democrats thought that you had a 50-50 shot of being hospitalized if you caught COVID. It's just like, oh my god.
Yeah, that was wild. That was
People are
crazy.
so misinformed about it. Now, it's not to say that it's nothing. It's just a flu, bro. It's just like it's not even that. It's just a cold even. Like obviously
No, it's
not.
just AIDS.
Yeah, it's just airborne AIDS is what it is. It's the
Exactly.
best analogy.
All right. Well, this has been a great intro, so we should probably get on to another thing that spreads AIDS, the porn industry. So we had noticed that.
You mean reduces the spread of
Hey,
AIDS?
that's slander. In California, you have to wear a condom while doing porn.
Yeah, well, that's why they all left to Texas.
Well, and all the people that are watching porn aren't having sex, therefore
It's
they're not
slowed
spreading
spreading
down.
AIDS.
We just solved AIDS. We did it, boys. Just pack up the show. We've done our job. All right. Yeah. What we're looking at is, pun intended, porn for today's topic. We noticed that doesn't seem to be a whole lot of consensus around it. Like in just the general milieu, a lot of people say, "Oh, like porn is clearly horrible for you. You know, it causes all sorts of problems like ED and all this type of stuff." That's what you see particularly out of the conservative camps. And then on the other side, you see quite a bit of saying like, you know, it's very liberating. It's good for people to be able to explore freely. Maybe it even has a protective effect against people doing much more sadistic things than they normally would because they can get their jollies out online. So we wanted to see what the actual science says. So we took a deep dive into that as much as we could over the week, and now have become much more enlightened. So what were your guys' thoughts coming into this before you did any research prior?
I
You,
guess I'll just
yeah, Hubbard's
start.
as is tradition.
Uh, Basically, I've I don't know. I've like seen a little bit of research, so I've seen the research that treats it basically as a behavioral addiction. Um, and for behavioral addictions, like even if the underlying behavior isn't necessarily bad, like inherently damaging, it can still be like bad for you. Like take, I think one that people might kind of think about in that way would be like video games, where video games probably aren't like horribly rewiring your brain or like causing you to like any sort of massively horrible health effects or anything like playing them. Like you sit on your phone and play Candy Crush, like is there really like super bad consequences of that? But there is like negative consequences of the behavior because it's wasting time. Like you might, if you spend all day, you might have not enough time to work on your job or spend time with your family, etc. Um, so, and the money, in Candy Crush, you're paying hundreds of dollars a month or whatever. I don't know what the hell the price is, but you're paying for Candy Crush to get all your extra lives, blah blah blah. So, just because it's not like the behavior itself, so regardless of whether or not porn is benign or not, it's the behavioral addiction part could still be bad. Um, and then, but I did kind of think going into it is probably harmful in itself, um, just because it seems like anything that is uh, not not in the vein of what we would have experienced evolutionarily, and you have like unlimited access to it, it's going to warp you in some way. And so maybe it's not a all good or all bad, but there's probably going to be negatives. Just going into it, I thought, it's so different from what an evolutionary environment would have been like. It's probably going to have some warping effects that are negative, even if there are maybe some offsetting positives.
Price, how about you?
Going into it, I was mainly looking to learn more about the modern effect of porn in the last, say, like 30 years, which I didn't end up finding a lot about, because I think that while porn has been around for quite a while, we've definitely never seen anything like is currently occurring. And it's pretty incredible to think the time span over which it happened, where basically before 2000, if you wanted porn, you either bought a VHS or you bought a magazine, or maybe you bought a DVD or a laser disc if you're feeling fancy. And then all of a sudden, everyone has a device that can get access to free porn all the time on them everywhere they go. And with data, you now have access. You don't even have to download it, just stream it. So I knew there was the anti-porn movement that's been around forever, and then what I've seen online is kind of tongue-in-cheek to an extent, but there's also like a pro-porn movement that thinks, oh, it's good for you, it's liberating your libido, you just gotta do it, man. And I think like half of it is a reaction against people who think it's bad, just kind of stick it to the man. But it's very incredible because in our lifetimes, Miley Cyrus like twerking on stage was a huge deal. Everyone's public outcry to that's just another TikTok trend. Like 12-year-olds would be doing that stuff now in terms of sexualization, I guess. And I think sexualization and pornography go hand in hand.
For me, I had actually pretty similar thoughts to Hubbard's, just in the sense that having unbridled access to something that you're not used to is clearly a problem with food that has not worked out great for people. Same with other things like alcohol, whatnot. If if a segment of the especially like particular segments of the population who are a little bit maybe more predisposed to abusing things, if you have unlimited access to something that's really satisfying, some like porn, it has I think it has quite a large chance of being abused, just generally speaking. Um, the other thing I would also think that is a bit in line um, with you, Price, I had thought that something I had noticed just generally, there is a pro porn movement, and it does seem to flare up whenever, particularly in the States, when the religious right starts banging the drum about porn. They usually start coming out of the woodwork to say, well, like, how dare you, stuffy old conservatives, try to control our bodies again. Like, you're just, you just hate. The one that I kind of noticed was you just hate women and their power or something like that. That's one of the ones I had run into a few times, that argument. And
Yeah, see, I've always seen it from the male side where it's also controlling bodies, but it's like they're trying to tell me how to whether or not I can jerk off.
yeah,
I'm not letting that one happen.
yeah. What I saw more of is like the production side of things, where I think it's the like, at least this is just like in the circles I run, I guess, where it was more so women saying, you shouldn't be able to tell us like what our sexuality is. Like, you're just trying to control sexuality again for women. But I could see like on the male side as well, we're saying. I think it's again, yeah, it's a reaction against the pretty heavily conservative Christian groups that find porn to be abhorrent and have always found porn to be abhorrent and will never stop finding it that way. But
Well, and a lot of them have always found any form of pleasure to be abhorrent, regardless of its harm or lack thereof.
yeah, exactly. So other than that, yeah, I kind of felt that it's also particularly the current day and age with stuff like OnlyFans, the rise of that is quite problematic. I like that was my assumption going into this, where if you have particular groups of men in particular groups of men are pretty, like, they struggle with certain types of control, I think, pretty heavily. So, they get addicted to video games, they get addicted to alcohol, they get addicted to all sorts of different things that are not good for them. And I think something like OnlyFans, where you actually have direct interaction with the porn star, it's like there's a lot of potential for abuse. So I think for this segment of men, it'll just make things a lot worse for them. They spend a lot more time and a lot more of their own money chasing something that's not good. And so I'd imagine that going into this, there are some pretty heavy social costs. I feel like it was or should be treated as an addiction, and we can jump into that right now if you guys want. That's all I got for my opening thoughts. Hubbard, do you want to kick it off?
Sure, yeah. I mean, if you look at the evidence, it's just fairly obvious that the science backs pornography as a behavioral addiction. And I think even just taking like a common sense view of it, it's hardly disputable to say something like gambling. There are some people who deny behavioral addiction in general. It has to be chemical or whatever. Aside from those few outliers, I guess, who don't really have any sway anymore, behavioral addiction is commonly understood, and it's legitimate in the literature, and it just makes sense. Like, if you can be addicted to gambling, why couldn't you be addicted to pornography? They both have a large, reward involved, compulsive behavior, that kind of thing. So, and then all the research that has been done pretty much supports that. It does basically utilize your reward system. It causes measurable brain changes. They've actually done like brain imaging studies showing that changes in porn addicts are similar to drug users. Structural changes are similar. And basically, it works along the lines of there. I found like the one of the best breakdowns is first there's sensitization where you become sensitive to past rewards. So obviously in porn, looking at the porn, you get an orgasm. That's a hugely rewarding thing for a person. It's a natural reward, and that causes you to become, cognizant of what led to those rewards, and then those things will act as cues. So being on your computer, being alone, situational cues that you observe that in the past have been associated with the reward, then become cues to trigger cravings. And as you use more and more pornography, then you get desensitized to the pleasure. And it's like building up a tolerance. You can think of it as building up a tolerance in, say, alcohol or drug use, where you get habituated to the stimulus, and it becomes less rewarding, and you need more of it. And then that leads to dysfunctional prefrontal circuits. So you basically, it starts to mess with your impulse control, and you get even more enhanced cravings. And then that's also been related with like basically malfunctions in your stress system, where you will oftentimes, then it becomes a way to deal with your stressors or bad feelings. Essentially, you'll revert to pornography to get rid of your bad feelings. And then there's actually been well observed withdrawals in basically all behavioral addictions, and pornography not being any different. So if you quit, you'll get anxiety, um, depression, irritability, mood swings, those kinds of things from quitting.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I noted in my research is that the brain changes that they have discovered in those who are addicted to, like, quote unquote addicted to pornography, are almost identical to those people who are addicted to cocaine and methamphetamines. So you get the same brain changes, even though one of them has like a severe chemical, what do they call it? Exogenic chemical in the habit formation, and the one doesn't, but they still form the same brain changes, which is, I think, pretty staggering. And they see the same things in eating, right? Like almost the exact same type of brain changes occurred with people um, who have severe problems with overeating. And to me, like that is such a like smoking pistol, in the fact that, you know, I remember South Park and all of, like, back in the early 2000s, maybe like getting up towards the 2010s, just like one of the jokes was, oh, sex addiction, porn addiction, that's not a real thing. And you'd see these sometimes, like, for example, South Park make fun of it. And it was quite hilarious. But looking at this now, like, to me, going through the actual like neurochemical research, it really doesn't leave
Well,
much wiggle room for it not being on the same level as something like a food addiction or a gambling addiction. And people know that, you know, you probably know somebody within your network that has a severe addiction of some form that's not to a chemical, like gambling or like food or whatever else, right? Some people can even, like, you can get some of that same addiction to aerobic exercise, which I found hilarious. Um, but you probably know somebody that has an addiction of that sort and know how, like, rough it is on them. And so yeah, it doesn't seem like there's much to argue here in terms of it being like not an addiction model.
one thing to just clarify there, like pornography addiction is nothing related to sex addiction, and I think like
Yeah,
the
that's
literature
true.
is pretty clear about that. Is I I didn't spend any time looking into sex addiction, or I'm maybe there's an analogous model for that, but that like the problem with porn is that it is basically a super stimulus in the sense that you have unlimited novelty at your fingertips and on demand at any time, any point of the day, whatever. And that's just not true with sex and sexual addiction. So they're
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, okay, Mr. Chad over here.
Giga Chad.
Um,
You're no longer Price. You're Giga Chad.
well, I didn't know you had enough money for the state of the art Japanese doll, but there you go.
Well, it might not be state of the art, but blow it up with nitrogen instead of air. So
I'll leave it at that.
So yeah, I think like there is sometimes a conflation of the two, and then that's used to like downplay pornography. It's like, oh, you can't be addicted to sex. Sex is natural.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Yeah, well, maybe that's true. Maybe I like nothing to say about sexual addiction. I don't know. But pornography is completely different because it's a completely different stimulus you're dealing with. And the stimulus being what it is why it's so problematic, right? If we were, I don't think in a hunter-gatherer environment, people would be too concerned with, say, food addiction, right? Like problematic eating. It's just when things aren't. It's when the stimulus is over available. That's when it becomes problematic. And just to add a few more things there, like going beyond, say, the brain imaging or whatever, just thinking about the basics of what an addiction is. The main one that I think most people would come into line with is continued use despite negative consequences. And that, like, you can go online and anywhere and read 1,000 testimonials of that fact of people using pornography to their detriment and them trying to quit because of all the negative consequences, and they can't. And they can't because there's compulsion, there's a lack of control, and there's craving. And so I think that is, aside from the brain imaging, that's the other smoking gun, is like there's people out there using this and consciously knowledgeable that it's harming them and want to quit and they can't. I don't know what else you want to use what other word you'd want to use for that, but I think addiction just fits perfectly there.
I think another reason porn addiction is kind of downplayed, and I found in 2 studies that I looked at, where they looked at problematic pornography use as well as frequency of pornography use, and they're only moderately correlated. So you can have very high frequency pornography users that don't have problematic outcomes due to their pornography use, and you can have people who rarely use pornography to the point of there are people that use pornography a few times a month yet have problematic pornography use because of the effects it has on their life. So like there's the addiction aspect isn't as cut and dry as just like, oh, I watch a bunch of porn and I'm not addicted, or I don't watch much porn so I can't have a problem.
And I think that comes back to food, where that's a big problem with overeating and not being able to correctly, say, diagnose that problem. Is everyone eats, right? And some people eat a lot and don't really feel it's a problem for them, right? Like they might be overweight or even obese, but they're okay with that. They don't really think it's a problem how much they eat. And then there's another segment of the population that overeats and finds it very problematic. And I think porn, like you said, porn's exactly the same way, where there's high frequency users that don't see it as a problem, high frequency users that see it as a big problem, low frequency users that see it as a big problem. And it's very ubiquitous as well, right? So there's tons of people out there that use porn. I think the numbers I saw were 80% of men and 30% of women use it weekly in the one survey I saw. And so probably most of them use it all the time and don't feel that it's problematic for them. So they dismiss the addiction model because they're like, oh, I use it. Doesn't really bother me. Why would anyone else have a problem with it?
Yeah, I definitely think there is like a downplaying of it where I think it's because it's such a private thing. It's harder to see the impacts of it, right? Whereas something like alcohol or being having a food addiction problem, the impacts are a lot more clear because you get drunk and crash your car, you smell like booze all the time, or you're obviously morbidly obese. It's just obvious as the nose on your face that a problem is happening, minus a few pretty good alcoholics who know how to mask it. But so I would say part of the reason it might get downplayed is it's not seen as much, even though maybe, and that might just cause like it to be just a little bit less talked about maybe. But I'd also say it's because it's like a new problem, whereas alcoholism and overeating have been a problem. Alcoholism for God knows how long, and overeating for probably like what 50, 60 years now.
Everyone
40
has
for
that
sure.
one guy on the site who goes into the porta potty every couple hours for 15 minutes. Everyone knows what he's doing in there with his phone. Sometimes you see it.
Yeah, I don't know what site you've been on, but touche.
Job site.
I think that's also like, I think you're right. Like, it is more private, so it is harder to see. But and again, like, I think alcohol is another comparison that works to illustrate it as well, where lots of people drink probably to an amount that isn't good for them,
Mm-hmm.
and they do have negative consequences, but they're in a denial, right? Like, and I think that's the same with porn, right? Like, so a lot of people that are high frequency might not admit that they have a problem, or might not, indicate to anyone that their use is problematic, but they do have negative consequences associated with their use. And that, I think, when I looked at the alcohol research, yeah, people are drinking a lot, and have some pretty bad outcomes, health and otherwise, that they overlook a lot of the
Yeah,
time.
they kind of sweep it under the rug. Well, remember in one of our earlier episodes when Pudluck was on, that was one of his points for the hot takes. He was just saying that it's actually, he thinks it's alcohol is like a lot more alcoholism is a lot more widespread and the consequences are a lot worse. But people just kind of are able to, oh no, my drinking's not much of an issue. It's that person who's blind drunk in the gutter every Tuesday morning that he's got a problem. It's not me with my 2 stiff martinis as fancy lawyer man
Or
every
3
night.
glasses of wine.
Oh yeah, like some of my friends, especially during the pandemic, their alcohol use. I even felt like my alcohol use, started creeping up a bit, and I was like, oh, like, initial reaction is like, it's probably not an issue. Then think about it for 5 more minutes, like, no, that's like that's a path towards a bad place. So time to slow that down.
Well, and I think going back to where you're saying, like, the visibility of that is the big problem with people accepting it, right? So if you drink 3 drinks a night every night, you might not notice any social consequences or any social problems out of that,
Yeah,
because
nobody's gonna be looking
you're
at you
not.
saying like, why are you on drink 3 on a fucking Tuesday, man? Like nobody's drinking.
Well, there's just no social consequence, because you're not wasted, you're not drunk, you're not slurring your words, you're always
Mm-hmm.
relatively fine. And but you go look at the health consequences, you are going to be hurting yourself in very measurable ways. And I think that can be the same with like, say, porn use, where you're using it once a day or twice a day, whatever, and you're saying, well, I don't notice anything wrong. Like, nobody's calling me out on my behavior. I don't notice anything like overtly wrong with myself. But then,
My dick hasn't fallen off randomly, so it all works. Like,
yeah, I'm
what's
not
going on? So
blind. Like the Catholics lied to me. I'm not blind. I
yeah,
can still
exactly. I'm
see.
not blind due to like what is it, copper, some retarded shit? I can't
And but then there might be some subtler issues, intimacy issues in a relationship, or whatever
which
the
accumulate over
downstream.
time too, right? They're not something that just hits you like a brick right in the moment. Like that's stuff that it might hit you in like a brick in 5 years down the line when you get a divorce over it. And that was a contributing factor. But
And you might never recognize that, right? Like, you
yeah,
might go, if you lack self-awareness or introspection on that issue, then you might never connect the dots. So I think
Yeah, never improve.
it is a big kind of like stealth thing where because it's not so one-to-one cut and dried, it's not like heroin or whatever where it's just obvious all the bad things that are happening. Yeah, people just kind of say, yeah, it's not a big deal. I use it. My life, I'm still together. I still have a relationship, a job, whatever. Like it can't be that bad, or it can't be bad if that's true. And it's like, well, it could still be bad. It can still degrade your quality of life, even 10% or whatever, and that's pretty big degradation. But you're still functioning.
Yeah, exactly. You haven't collapsed into the black hole, but you're just living a life that's maybe devoid of some extra benefits or extra functionality that would have been pretty great to have had you not but you're not even aware of it, right?
But do those extra benefits give you sexual pleasure, sexual curiosity, fantasy, boredom avoidance, lack of sexual satisfaction, emotional distraction, suppression, stress reduction, and self-exploration?
That sounds like some sort of fake
Maybe.
study by a porn agency.
No, that's the attempt at making a factor analysis of motivations behind using porn. Not all of those were implicated in everything, but that was their factors they came out with.
Yeah. One of the interesting things is that I came across is there's quite a lot of correlational data with porn use. Quite a bit extra. There's a threefold increase in people's chances of being unfaithful to their partner if they are a habitual user of porn, which again, these are all correlational, but there was a lot of correlational data for various bad outcomes with porn use. And
one of the big things with problematic pornography use is a lack of self-control. What do they call it in this study? Impaired control. So individuals with impaired control are much more likely to have the problematic porn use. So impaired control probably has a lot of correlations with a lot of that stuff as well. I don't know if they're controlled for that, but
well, that's exactly why I say correlational, right? Like it's you have no idea.
But you can imagine how someone with bad self-control has less successful relationships and marriages.
Yeah. I do think that's probably bidirectional. Due to the fact we do see brain changes, right? So we do see brain changes, but it's also likely that people with poor impulse control are more likely to end up addicted and more likely to end up with relationship problems. My guess is, I didn't see any explicit attempts to establish clear causation, but my guess is bidirectional, right? Like your porn use is going to lead to impaired executive control, but people with predisposed to have poor impulse control are more likely probably going to be, and so it's kind of like the rich get richer, the poor get poorer.
Fact. It's actually another one that I found, right? Where it was porn and attitudes towards sexual consent, basically, and that was another one where it was people who had strong opinions about sexual consent weren't affected by porn consumption. It wasn't a predictor of their attitude towards sexual consent. But people who had loose attitudes towards sexual consent, their porn consumption was a predictor of how low they would go. So there's definitely that sort of heterogeneous effect based on personality types of the people consuming it. Oh, one of the most interesting things that I found in two of the studies that looked at gender was that they found either insignificant or weakly significant correlations between gender and outcomes. Obviously, only looking at porn users. So the fact that less women use porn is still significant. But among women that use porn, there wasn't a huge difference between their outcomes and men for addiction and frequency of use.
I guess that's a bit surprising, but not terribly surprising given the fact that you did mention it's obviously a bit of a selection thing going on there, where you have just way less women, and the ones that use porn, so the ones that are using porn probably are kind of maybe predisposed to some of those issues. So you just kind of get similar rates. But
Yeah.
it's a little bit counterintuitive, I guess.
Well, when it comes to like sexual functioning problems, I'm pretty sure I've only ever heard of postulations that it has to do with the male, but the sexual functioning problems are actually found to be more severe with women in one study,
That's
although the
interesting.
rate was the same as with males.
I wouldn't have guessed that, but yeah, that is something a little bit interesting. That it was just the one study, though. It was.
Yeah, this was just one study,
Okay.
so it's not like this is the way it is, but
Yeah, but
at the
it's good
very least,
evidence
the
starting.
women do have problems with sexual functioning if they have problematic pornography use.
I guess one thing we didn't touch on was like there has been a bit of a academic spat with the addiction model, and before doing the research, I thought it was much more like a much more contentious, kind of unsettled issue, and there was like two sides to the story, essentially. And then I looked into it, and it doesn't really seem like that. It seems like pretty much all the science points in one direction in terms of the behavioral addiction model. But there are two individuals that are continually stirring shit um, against the behavioral addiction model.
I love this.
One of them is
Glorious.
just a real gem, Nicole Prouse. She's permanently banned from Twitter for basically malicious behavior, repeated malicious behavior, and
She should actually just wear that as a badge of honor, though.
true. But it is just funny that she managed to get herself banned from Twitter. And
Sex researcher.
she did 3 studies. Essentially, she was linked 3 studies that supposedly countered the addiction model. And one of them, she was the primary author on 2, and then she was the secondary author with the other guy that's always involved in these things, David Lay. And anyway, I only really looked deep into one study, and what she found essentially in that study was that I guess her counter argument was that it was sexual desire, not hypersexuality, that is related to neurophysiological responses elicited by porn, basically. So she was, as far as I can understand it, she was trying to argue that it was just high sexual libido that led people to have this basically high response to pornographic images, and there was no addiction involved. It was just people's variance in natural libido. But what she found was, basically she found that higher reactivity to pornographic stimulus was negatively correlated with sexual desire, but had no correlation with hypersexuality. So if you think of the porn addiction model, it actually supports the porn addiction model, because it's basically saying people that are more excited or more turned on by porn have less real life sexual desire, which that's actually something that they've commonly found and has been a common complaint in porn addicted people, is that they don't have they don't have actual desire for real interaction, and they oftentimes, when they're presented with a real life sexual situation, they can't perform, or they're not interested because of their porn. So she never makes a case why her finding doesn't support the porn addiction. She just says it doesn't. And then she's got sued a couple times since then she got into a hilarious fight with the founder of NoFap, which is like this I don't know, maybe it's dead and gone, but it used to be pretty
It's a meme for sure now. I don't know how many people take it seriously.
but yeah, it was
It's
like a
pretty
fairly
big community, because I was doing some research on it for the podcast, and it's it's still alive and well. It seems
Well,
to
the
be.
one thing that is alive and well is No Nut November, which was actually kind of spawned out of the no fap movement. And basically, it was this guy that had noticed that his pornography use had been problematic in his life, so he tried to like start a kind of a movement to get people to quit porn, basically. And the no fap portion of it was basically he noticed that the best way to quit porn was like go cold turkey and not jerk off and not watch porn because jerking off would lead to relapse into porn, and then that was kind of his movement. And anyway, she got into this weird, crazy fight with him because she didn't like that he was going against porn. And anyway, a couple of she was trying to claim that he sicked the nofap community on her and made death threats. Blah blah blah. There was a bunch of news articles published. Several of them had to be retracted because they were deemed to be what's the term?
Deflammatory.
The defamatory of the NoFap founder. And anyway, he
Jesus.
basically walked away victorious from that one. She also got into a huge fight with the founder of Your Brain on Porn, which is basically just a repository of studies on the effects of porn on your brain. And she also lost a lawsuit to him. And then the first person she actually got into a fight with was just a random doctor who had criticized her first research paper, and she got sued by him for defamation and lost that one as well.
Does she now work at Happier Living? Is that where she's at? Do you know?
She runs her own like she was a adjunct at UCLA, I think, and they didn't renew her contract, so she hasn't
But do you
actually
know
been.
like do you know where she
She runs her own consultancy
do you know no do you know
thing.
where she got her schooling from? Because there's a bunch of like because I was looking her up and there's multiple people with that same name who actually work in like their PhDs in sex research, and do you not want to fucking look at the wrong person and say, oh yeah, this is the one, then it's a different one.
Um, she got her doctorate at Indiana University
Oh, okay, so
University
this is still the
Bloomington.
one that this is the one that now works at. She's a psychologist at another company, Happier Living or something. She's still publishing random shit on it and pushes it out on her platform.
She basically runs her own platform, as far as I can tell. Like she doesn't have any real association with academic research
No, it
anymore.
seems like she because she was a tenure track professor, and it seems like she lost that.
Yeah, she got let go from UCLA in the beginning of 2015 and hasn't really had any real connection to the world of academia since. And not surprising, like she's
Yeah,
just a walking liability. She also had a bunch of she made up a bunch of false that doctor that criticized her work. She called his university and falsely reported sexual harassment allegations against him, to try to get him fired. Which
seems
is
like just a she has she's been at a whole bunch of I think I found her LinkedIn and she's just been all over the place. Like
yeah she
she doesn't last much more than she doesn't last much more than 9 months on the job, and then she has to move. She's got a big string of them where she just gets like let go.
she's
Fucking
a
hilarious.
walking liability, essentially, trash fire. The other guy, David Lay, is just he's essentially a porn lobbyist. He's paid by, or he was on the unapologetically on the X Hamster payroll. Um,
Straight
I
up.
never even knew X Hamster had payroll. But
Yeah.
yeah,
You don't
and
think?
it's so weird. Like I just because I was researching articles and I'd come to articles where it was like, presenting a two-sided argument about the addiction versus not addiction model, and every single article was Nicole Prouse and David Lay being quoted or talked about as like oh, maybe it's not an addiction. These are the only two people do like ever that are quoted or talked about basically, and they're both complete unreliable garbage sources. Like one's a paid shill and one's a psychotic nightmare that shouldn't probably be in academia, and I don't, as far as I know, isn't anymore due to her. insanity. So yeah, I was actually just surprised how like one-sided it all is. In terms of like the research just all piles up on one side, and there's no, as far as I know, like well-known, respected, credible counter argument out there. There's nobody. There's no one publishing substantial research pushing back against the behavioral addiction model at
One of
all.
the only
So
things that one of the only resistance that I would come across, other than people just saying, you know, mean conservatives, like how dare you touch our like liberating porn. I definitely saw that, but the more sophisticated things that I would see are PR campaigns by porn companies, essentially. I came across a couple of those doing the same smear tactics that oil companies used against climate change. Same with um, the tobacco industry. There's definitely a subsection of their budgets that go to making sure that they're protecting their own interests. Like if
I'm just surprised that there's not more of it. Like,
yeah, that's true. I would
I
have.
feel
porn is,
like
yeah.
they kind of just let their users do the heavy lifting for them. I feel like they're in a position where it's going to be very difficult to move the, how would you say, it's not like smoking where you can say like this causes lung cancer, right? Like you can say there's changes in the brain and like behavioral problems, but those are not the same as this lung cancer. And
Yeah,
look how
just
hard it
somebody
was to do
dying on a
smoking.
vent in a brutal fashion. It doesn't have the same. It doesn't elicit the same emotions from the general public, right? It just people don't. I think it's also shameful, right? So they just don't really want to talk about it. They just don't. I would especially say that in particular, like parts of America and Canada, they don't like discussing that type of stuff at all, and so they're not going to.
Think about it this way: as long as we avoid porn regulation, we'll never have the whatever the American version of K-pop would be.
Oh my god.
In case anybody is not knowledgeable on the fact, Korea does ban porn, so that you need to use a VPN if you want to view porn in their country. So that absolutely, this is scientifically a fact, led to the development of K-pop into a hypersexualized entertainment medium, where they're constantly having to send their dance routines to government censors for review, so that they're not over the line into an actual sexual performance, and they're trying to ride that line as tight as they can, and hence they've taken over the world.
They do.
We'll all
They
just
do.
be K-pop minions soon.
Yeah, they do the sexualized, but not actual porn the best.
Yeah, they're
Best
the
in the world.
masters.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole nother topic about regulation. But I think it's just, I I'm not very big in favor of like sweeping regulation. The one another curious example of if people want to delve into attempts is the UK, because they
Oh yeah,
were
that was a weird one.
trying to ban,
Disaster.
basically prevent access to pornography for people under the age of 18 on the internet. And so they were going to like do some sort of ID thing. And it was actually, I'm pretty sure the winning bid for the ID system was MindGeek, which runs Pornhub.
We're getting them on both sides, coming and going.
Yeah, and they basically
Good for 'em.
there was numerous issues with it. One of the major ones was how to deal with sites that offer porn but aren't pornography sites, and the big examples being like big social media sites, like classic one like Reddit,
Tumblr.
Tumblr. Although Tumblr did get rid of porn.
Well, that's Apple's figured out how to get rid of porn. It's we put a gun to their head and say, if you don't get porn off your site, we take you off the App Store. Discord and Tumblr bent the knee already.
Yeah, now Tumblr's dead, so like
Well, and
Great
I
job.
wonder how it's going to affect Discord that you can no longer access not safe for work communities from an iPhone. It's interesting.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the UK, the broader thing is, yeah, they couldn't in practice find a feasible way to make it work in a Western country where there's fairly strong protections on people's freedoms. You can't just censor whatever you like. You can't just sure. As far as I know, South Korea's less has less freedoms,
Certainly.
and uh, obviously they're much more free than China. But like, say somewhere like China could easily ban porn, right? Like they just
Yeah.
clamp it all down. So you don't really have the same practical options in a Western country. So I don't know if like straight regulations are necessarily going to be the fix, but I do think just an awareness and conversation about it is a good place to start.
Yeah, I feel when you're dealing with something like porn or any other type of thing that is related to freedom of expression and freedom of speech, you have to tread extraordinarily carefully. Otherwise, you're going to wind up stripping away freedoms unintentionally or intentionally, depending on which government is the one that installs it. Like we're dealing with that here in Canada with that whole Bill C-10 bullshit, where it's trying to regulate big social media. Well, supposed to regulate the big social platforms, but the way that it's worded is clearly open to all sorts of abuse. And then even the way that the uh, Canadian, he's the head of the Heritage Department, the way that he discussed it twice was so clearly um, like already had in mind of using it in a poor manner. And so when you start to regulate these things, it can easily slide off the cliff. It's a
Well, and it's just not logical because the internet is easy to get around those sort of regulations,
it
and then
might
you
work
create
for really lazy people, but
a whole ecosystem of like
workarounds.
underground porn then, which is not good because then that funnels money towards places you don't want it to be.
Yeah, that's exactly why keeping weed illegal is retarded. You're just pushing money to the people that you really don't want to have any of the money.
Well, I think like a good example of that is like Pornhub, right? What's his name? The New York Times columnist that did a big expose on Pornhub with the underage pornography on there and the non-consensual pornography on there, and it was like it wasn't a very large percentage of their videos, obviously, but they just didn't have adequate moderation or rules in place to prevent it from happening over and over again. And they would remove it if it was brought to their attention, but it just, what does it, the damage, I guess, so to speak, is done because it gets uploaded, gets hundreds of thousands of views, lots of people download it, it gets endlessly re-uploaded, etc.,
Yeah, I
etc.
have
And
50,000 copies of the same thing on like
it
multiple
wasn't
sites.
government regulation that did anything about it. It was the payment processing. I think it was Mastercard saying they're not gonna deal with Pornhub anymore due to their concerns. PayPal also yanked their support, and then so Pornhub purged every non-verified video on the site, and now you have to be a verified person to upload to Pornhub. So I mean, this is like a broader direction the internet's going in general, where you're going to get basically the sanitized version of everything, and porn included. So porn will probably become amalgamated in like huge in structures like Pornhub, and I think the access to pornography will get narrower and narrower and narrower and funneled more and more into centralized distributors like Pornhub. And most people, like you said, will just be lazy
Yeah, they're
and
just
they'll
gonna be
use them.
lazy. They don't care. They're like, well, I just want to watch like this one random video of, whatever category. I don't really give a fuck. They're not gonna go spend all the time to get into the random new ecosystem in order to get around it. Like you're gonna have like whoever wants to get whatever they want they're gonna be able to find whatever they want online. But those people already could, right? Like they already were gonna go find whatever they
Yeah,
wanted.
I think the content will decline though. Like there just less demand will lead to less supply. Like when most people are on the centralized distribution, I think that's the same for um
It'll be just
everything on the internet. It's the direction everything on the internet is going to is like centralized, amalgamated. You know, the internet's going to be 50 websites in 10 years. And it's just going to regulate itself, right? Like you're going to have these huge multi-billion-dollar companies in pornography that distribute all the porn, but they'll probably end up making most of the porn.
yeah, it's just gonna be like Netflix and then a few other big producers,
Well,
right?
they'll make the big name stuff, and then they'll have a bunch of subcontractors, aka verified amateurs, that work for them, right?
Just literally other like just
That's
other
one
level
thing.
of the company. It's not even
Uh,
amateurs.
like I couldn't find any academic studies on this because I think they're all just done by boomers who don't realize there's stuff other than professionally made porn. But it's like, most of the boys end up getting bored of the old professionally made stuff in a matter of time. And so I think there will be like verified amateurs, I think, with the system on Pornhub. But I want to know more about like the effects of basically people who jerking off stuff that's not porn. Like,
What do you
and
mean
what
not
those
porn?
effects are. Like suggestive images or stories or
Oh, like kind of almost softcore in a sense.
go super old school imagination. Like,
Yeah, I would imagine it's. I mean, I can't say for sure. I imagine it's kind of gradiential, right? Where the level of you know the spectrum of how stimulating it is probably affects how much it impacts your kind of psychology.
Yeah, it's like the super stimulus, right? Where
Well,
if
and
it's
I mean,
extreme super stimulus, you're gonna have a lot bigger impacts than if it's just something that's a lot more banal.
well, that also comes out of the research of porn itself. Like visual porn is like they show effects for even smaller amounts of use, but it's kind of like a gradient. The more you use, the more effects on your brain it has. So my guess would be, that it would be similar, and probably something like erotic stories would be very low impact, right?
I see. I think erotic stories have got to be up there. Like, women love them for sure, and like a
Yeah,
decent
that's
chunk of
women's.
guys are into it. But like that drives the North American publishing market, which is hilarious. I would put money on it. Like that is, if you can pump out 6 erotic novels in a year, like women are just going to eat that up. They're going to get big profits. They're going to make money. You pump
No,
out
but
six nonfiction historical, you're done.
I mean, in brain changes, like, do you think that someone who reads 6 erotic novels a week or whatever has the same brain changes as someone who watches 3 hours of hardcore porn every day?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Is
I
like
just don't. I don't believe
because
that.
I
Yeah,
think
I
like
wouldn't guess so because
the
it's gonna.
stimulation is similar, but
Well, I
that's
would
what
Well,
you
guess.
have to see.
they've shown screen. No, they've shown like screens in themselves are a stimulus onto themselves that have warping effects on the brain. Like people's visual stimulus is certainly a different category. Um, all my intuition would tell me that like the visual experience of visual pornography and even video, the fact that it's video rather than still image is a huge
Yeah, and
increase
but
in
there's also
the
like a
impact.
ramping up, right? Where you can just even in the course of like one session of masturbation, you can ramp up the intensity, right? Whereas a book, it's not going to ramp up in the same way in its intensity in terms of, you can go from starting with a really bland porn video to seeing some crazy shit all within 5 minutes if you really want to. And I just don't feel like books are going to be written like that for the most part. Now, you might be able to write a bunch of books like that and see what happens to the women that read them, but
And there's just not this super novelty, right? Like it's like,
yeah,
yeah, you're reading a book. It's about like generally, it's probably not going to be about in detailed description of 70 different sexual partners in a row.
Oh, I mean, they definitely have the detailed description of sex. That is
No,
for
but
sure.
I mean, like, it's not going to be different sexual partners. Like, a big part of the driving force behind porn is novelty of the person you're viewing, right? And in a book, it's well, correct me if I'm wrong, but my guess is like most romance novels and sexually explicit novels are probably about a couple or two people or a love triangle or something like that, not, you know, just a random collection of random sexual encounters where everything's novel each time, and they just chronicle out 70 of those in a row.
I mean, it just really depends on what you're looking for. You can find either, like in the same sense that you could watch The Notebook or something and find that arousing. Maybe I've never watched it, but you could watch some love story and find that arousing. But like, it wouldn't have the same intensity as like multiple
my
partners
guess is
short
most
term.
people are reading 50 Shades. That in those lines, right? Some romance, and especially in the female market, that's probably going to be what it's just basically a regurgitation of some sort of sexual relationship between two people, or maybe adding a triangle. I mean, that was Twilight, right? And
Well, everything's got to have a triangle because that's like just unnecessary tension.
But again, I'd agree with you. I'd love to see the studies because everything tells me that the visual pornography would just be far and away way more impactful.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know like from what's the term? Anecdotal stuff. I think a lot of people just get bored of visual pornography, especially videos, but would like to see like any sort of study along those lines. But I couldn't find anything.
A lot of, I think that's maybe true, but I think a lot of the strategies around for men, especially, I mean, maybe women, you might have a better point. A lot of the strategies for men is just ramping up the novelty and extremeness in the pornography, right? And I think that's been seen, and like that is a big finding in the literature, is that part of that, I guess, increased tolerance leads to more novelty seeking and more extremeness. And so this is just my guess is most men don't read erotic literature.
No, that's much more that they.
Well, it depends on how you define it. I think there's like a growing. I'd say there's a large and growing group that read. Literature is probably too grandiose a word, but basically erotic short fiction about like their parasocial relationships, and so like that's where like OnlyFans or Instagram or YouTube or Twitch, like these sort of parasocial relationships, and then they build this sort of community.
That might be true. Again, I'd still say it's probably way less than like the 80% of men that use porn.
Oh yeah, it's definitely much smaller. But
and two, it's probably serves a lot of it serves a different function, right? Like I think, I mean, we could talk about OnlyFans. I think a lot of that stuff is trying to find what's missing from porn, which is the intimacy and the actual connection, right? Like that's why it's a parasocial relationship, and they're not satisfied with the just pure sexual stimulation, right? So they're seeking out something that's lacking in porn, and the big criticism of porn is that it lacks that thing, right? So
yeah,
my guess would be, again, that's a point in favor of that type of community or that type of engagement, is that it's more complete.
But I mean, is it the real deal? Because it's usually not considered the real deal, that you're not actually getting intimacy, you're getting like a fake intimacy. And then if that's fulfilling your need for intimacy, then you're no longer going to be searching for intimacy. So it could be worse in the long run for you that you've found this basically band-aid that allows the wound to fester.
Yeah,
I could see that.
That's kind of the way I view those.
Well, that's the way I've seen it framed usually for parasocial relationships.
That's exactly my intuition with those, where it's you are whoever this is, hypothetically, you're placing the you're actually putting like a lot of time and effort into it instead of putting the time and effort and emotional valence into something that's gonna actually produce a real relationship, right? So it just saps all of your resources, and it's
Oh, speaking of sapping resources, I have the pinnacle of degeneracy. Like, this is the other thing
if
is
it
my
has something to do
anecdotal
with fucking
experiences.
hollow bullshit, I'm gonna fucking
No,
turn off the
my anecdotal experiences are obviously from like the most degenerate quartile, at least. But
we're talking bottom fucking percent.
the rise of FinDom, standing for financial domination,
Oh,
and especially virtual,
no.
where people literally donate money in order for a woman to make fun of them and or humiliate them, and then ask for or demand more money from them,
And it's all
and
like
then
a virtual
humiliate them more
tutor
in
type.
return. No, this is like it's usually there's not even a video involved. It's usually entirely text back and forth, and if you're paying enough, there'll be voice. But like, if you have to go real all out, like thousands of dollars to get a video.
Like, how is that not just all just Indian scammers going?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Oh, the best part is if you're a poor fag, but you still want to get into FinDom, like you basically never ask for proof. It's a code of honor. You never ask for proof that the person you're talking to via text is a woman, because everyone knows they aren't. Because if you're only paying $5, you're not getting a woman. Sorry.
oh
That's
my
some Indian scammer making a quick 5 USD. And that's big money over in India.
That is so funny, but also so fucking sad. I've heard of this shit. I remember seeing that on 4chan once and just thinking, no way you pay for this shit. Like, you guys are just, like, this is just being retarded, as they normally are. But I guess it's been confirmed.
Oh, they get run off B because that's how degenerate they are.
Yeah,
They're too degenerate for B.
Oh, they gotta be
They
RP9 then.
go into trash, and you don't even want to know what goes into trash.
I would estimate that the parasocial relationship is not healthy, but I would say like the people who are porn addicted are probably in a worse spot than people who have have the parasocial relationship problem.
Well, you could be a little bit of both.
Well, I think the argument though, generally would be that someone who's porn addicted is hopefully more likely to realize their problem and seek help than someone who's in a parasocial relationship. That one is actually probably worth a full discussion in of itself, because
it's really
that's like the future growing problem.
That is something that I noticed as well, like with the rise of the premium Snapchats and shit. Like a few years ago, probably like 2017 or something like that. Maybe even earlier, like 2015.
Yeah, dude, premium snaps are such a classic. Like, OnlyFans basically came into this ecosystem where they're like the only people that aren't a literal scam website that are offering you the chance to communicate directly with the person providing you your porn.
To be fair, apparently OnlyFans isn't just porn, which is a revelation to me.
Oh, I also knew that.
One of the top, well, like I thought it was like, I thought it was like 98% porn and like 2% whatever normal people on there that were using it for like fan interactions. But it's probably, I don't know what the actual numbers are, but it's like probably a bit more balanced than I thought. Because like one of the biggest creators on there is Tyga.
I don't know who Tyga is.
He's a rapper. He's a male rapper.
But I can
another one is Cardi B.
That I had heard of OnlyFans in like 2018, and I think it was for supporting musicians, but it was basically these Instagram and Snapchat. I think the politically correct term is sexual workers that were looking for a way to have people sign up to their premium accounts without having to go through some sketchy third-party website with a sketchy payment system, and OnlyFans was like the logical solution.
Oh, okay. So then they just kind of took over OnlyFans.
And even then, like a lot of these premium Instagrams are still just a slightly more risque Instagram post that would probably fly on Instagram, but then you're in the community of people who can see it.
Well, a lot of it is like porn light, right? Like a lot of it is like Instagram thoughts that have like fitness channels or whatever. I think one of the big ones is a fitness blogger. It's just some chick that posts her ass, I'm sure. And
it's the fitness IG crowd.
7 angles a day, right? And
7 angles, but always the same pose.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, but I also had a fucking shaker bottle. So, by the way, fitness post.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, like there's
Now go
protein
buy
powder in the
my
bottom corner.
Gymshark sponsored shit.
But yeah, I don't know. Like even OnlyFans is like big, I guess. It's like makes way more than Twitch and Patreon. But even compared to like porn, it's like a fucking minnow. It has less than 1/10 the monthly visits as Pornhub, which
Oh, that's
Pornhub
a
is
classic.
And that's just
I've
one of the big
seen
players.
like campaigns, quote unquote campaigns on the internet of people just posting about how like basically support your local sex workers, like buy OnlyFans. Don't go to Pornhub, buy OnlyFans.
Which happened. Well, there's gonna be a
But
chunk of the OnlyFans people
that's
are
that's
gonna be.
ridiculous because Pornhub has tons of verified amateurs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably if you're in a big city, tons from your own hometown.
I
Support your
guess
local verified amateurs.
And then
This is just-
cyberstalk them and then get arrested.
yeah. I don't
Pull
know.
a true crazy fucking super fan move.
The other hilarious thing about OnlyFans is it's just like an insane illustration of Pareto distribution. 1% of users make 33% of the revenue,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
which might be more or less actually skewed. They don't include tips, which I think tips and private messages are about 1/3 of OnlyFans revenue, so those aren't included. So it might be more or less skewed than that, but not that far
Yeah,
in
but
either
it
direction,
probably
I'm
wouldn't
sure.
skew extremely.
I'd say there's
hard.
a couple, like there'd be a couple in the small numbers that would have heavy tipping whales, but probably you're not. Yeah, you're not skewing that average very much.
And
'Cause there's so many more people in the top.
the median creator makes 155 a month.
It's just like nothing.
No, it's not bad, really.
It's not terrible. Like I
It
mean, if
depends
you're-
on like the effort the median creator puts in, I guess.
yeah, it's true. Like if you're putting
Well,
in
it depends,
5 hours
right?
a
Like
week,
if you're
it's
putting
pretty
in quite a
shit.
bit of work, but you're also, you are risking damaging your own, like your life going forward. If you,
what are you dude? Posting some bikini thoughty pics are not going to ruin your life.
well, no, if you're going full on, like nudes.
Even nudes. There's like a
And
teacher
this
that
age,
is
like,
hugely
you'll have
popular.
so much defense if anyone comes at you. That's slut shaming.
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah, it's
there
kind
was
of
a
true
there-
now
the
that
most
it's like,
popular porn poster on OnlyFans was a teacher, and she got found out, and nothing happened.
like I
It's
said,
kind of like bizarre how far those goalposts have shifted because I think you're correct as a boomer that back in like
yeah, it's true. Well, I
90s and
remember what it was like
2000s, if you were in a porn, ooh,
2009 or something like that. In BC, there was I think it was BC that fired a teacher because she had a glass of wine in her profile picture. They fired her. I'm pretty sure that was a Canadian teacher who got let go.
but with Canadian teachers, like with such strong unions, that they probably wanted to fire her for years, and that was her final slip up that they managed to get her out of there for. It's
Yeah,
so
she-
hard to fire teachers
She
in
probably
Canada.
fucking cut off some student's hand, and they're like, "Fuck, that's not big enough."
They're like, oh, see, we have this clause that our teachers can't be bad influences with imbibing alcohol or something, and you violated that, so we can finally fire you.
Yeah, that's actually a classic. And with unions, have to like.
Okay, so I found the details. She was forced. She had an option: resign or be suspended for having a photo of herself with a glass of beer in one hand and a glass of wine in the other hand. A very
Oh, during it
innocent
to
photo.
excess too.
And she chose to resign instead of being suspended, which I find weird. I would have just fucking
Man, never ever resign, no
yeah,
matter
exactly.
what.
It's just like laugh at them and then say, "What are you doing?" Like, why would
The only people that should be resigning are people that have contracts where they still get fat payout when they resign, like big wigs. Everyone else
Yeah.
just go until they fire your ass. Like, there's no downside.
Go until they force you out.
Oh,
do
this
you
is the
guys-
American one. This is a Georgian one that this happened to. So she probably has no rights. Just been thrown out of a window.
Yeah, America's a wild west for teachers.
For everything, ride or
Yeah,
die,
it's true.
at will.
Yeah.
They don't will you to be employed anymore. Therefore, you're not. Sucks to suck.
Yeah, but
Anything
now I
else you
bet you
guys
you
wanna?
could. Like, you could just say whatever or do whatever you want. They probably couldn't do anything to you. You'd be like, how dare you? How dare you slut shame this teacher? Um,
Well, your school wouldn't be allowed to serve Coca-Cola products anymore, that's for sure. It's on the wrong side of history, but
Any other points that we want to touch on?
I found an interesting study about unethical behavior and pornography. The way they did the study was they started with correlational evidence that people who viewed more pornography demonstrated or responded that they did more unethical behaviors. And then they did a study where they primed people before the experiment, asking them either to recall their last exercise session or their last pornography watching session. And then they had them watch a video, and they recorded them watching the video, whether or not they like fast forwarded through it or looked at their phone or however to not pay attention to the video. And they found that the people who were primed with pornography had more lying behaviors about whether or not they had skipped on the video or looked at their phone.
that's interesting.
So just priming people to remember pornography because they couldn't ethically show people porn. Or it's not the 70s anymore, guys. But priming them about
slam them full of LSD and then make them watch 6 hours of porn straight.
can't just literally stick a tool on their dick and see how aroused they get by the pressure exerted on the tool.
Oh,
Jesus Christ.
another interesting thing that's not like fully porn related, but I think porn is one of the reasons that it's happening is virginity rates and sex. So like millennial generations are having less sex than any other generation. And the craziest number is there's just like a report that came out that adult male virginity has risen. So this was share of men aged 30 who report zero female sexual partners since they turned 18. In 2008, that was 8%. In 2017, it was 27%.
It's ludicrous.
That's really interesting because it seems like from every study I saw that porn consumption like lowers the rate of first sexual
Yeah, that's
intercourse.
what I had seen too.
So then they would
those are
that makes so much sense to go from 18 then because basically they have sex as a young buck and then they're through with it, you know? They've had their fill.
Well, I think it's just I could see porn lowering the age on average, but I think it's leaving us because for women it's unchanged basically that rate. But it's tripled in the last 10 years. That's just crazy. And I think a big part of that is like retreat to online and pornography in
so
general.
those who are gonna have sex have it earlier, but those who don't, they're
But this was
those who are at risk of like not potentially engaging in it, they just don't and they retreat.
But this is like people who use porn at a young age were more likely or had sex at a younger age, like correlationally. But I could see that like using porn at a young age would also I could see that would also influence this rise in 18 to 30-year-old virginity.
Yeah, I would
right
guess
because
that
it would give you that it would give you that recourse where you can have your sexual satisfaction without the hassle of a adult relationship.
Exactly.
Well, and I think that also ties in with just less sex in general, right? Like people are having less sex, and I think a big part of that is because they have the option for pornography, right? Like it's just why you can make a bunch of arguments about sexual relationships being more fraught maybe these days for everyone involved. But on the flip side, I don't think that would be enough to decline the numbers without another outlet, right? Like
because people need they're still gonna desire it, even if it's more.
If they didn't have a substitute, they would still risk it, right?
Yeah.
But if you have a basically zero risk, free, unlimited substitute, it's pretty tempting.
Yeah, just not to worry about anything. Something else that I found interesting because the big argument is like porn causes an increase in violence towards women. That was one of the big things argued about, and there was no, from what I could see, I don't know what you guys found if you looked into this, but um, a lot of the argument was, oh, if you increase the ubiquity of sex or of sex of pornography, it's gonna, you know, it's a lot of it's misogynistic and violent, which a lot of it is actually pretty extreme. It's going to cause greater rates of violence towards women, but from what the studies that had been done, they haven't been able to find any correlation.
Well, yeah, because that would imply like a Coomer brain would actually go into the real world and do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
The one that and see, this is where exactly as you just said, the one about attitudes towards consent changing with porn consumption. Yeah, basically the people high using porn with low attitudes towards consent, like they probably just aren't having much sex, no matter what. Like they aren't coercing women to sex; they just aren't having sex.
They're not. They are not
They're
going to be impacted by those
they
studies.
don't think that they need consent, but they also just don't have any sex.
I think it's like the violent video game argument, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like it probably does make your attitude like worse. It just
It doesn't
it
impact
makes it gives
action.
it just well it just in fact it actually reduces your action in the real world because you just retreat into a virtual world, right?
Yeah.
And so if you spend all your time online is like risk free. Yeah, I think it like lowers your risk tolerance spending all your time online. And I think that even with video games that's true, right? Like so I think people who are say always watching porn or always playing video games, they're just naturally get acclimatized to an environment that has zero risk and requires zero action,
Yeah.
and they're just not going to act out in the real world because they're a bunch of
Well, like you built
essentially
up the walls, right? Now
yeah,
trying to
like
get
they're
outside of them is just it's way too much. Like because you've been sitting in this little room without any sort of real challenge or any sort of real um, hardship or struggle. Just the idea of actually going out there and trying something, even if it's going to be nefarious, is just it's just not going to
well,
happen. It's too
except
intense.
for like the one in a million that actually goes like
Gets in,
snaps, right?
yeah,
And then
snaps, gets
goes
a gun and
full
fucking shoots up
and
a
goes
bunch of sex
postal.
workers in a Vietnamese area of town.
So it makes sense that your average amount of violence or your average amount of acting out would decline, but you would have like more extreme events like that. So I don't know. I mean, there's no science to this, all
Yeah, it's
speculation,
all
but
exactly. It's all speculation, but
none of it seems particularly like outside the realm of possibility. Like it all kind of lines up fairly well with other, the porn notion lines up with the video game notion, right? Like the video game one I know a lot more of, and it's just like unequivocally does not increase violence.
yeah, that I've definitely not ever seen any real proof of.
So,
All right,
any
anything else?
I think that about sums it up.
All right, that's it for me. Thanks for listening, everybody. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.